Pain is usually associated with something we avoid at all costs. Burns, blows, fractures. These are experiences meant to warn us of danger. But do we always act that way? Consider this. Why do people engage in intense workouts that cause muscle soreness? Why do they cry with emotion during sad movies? Why do some people get full body tattoos, even though it hurts? Or why can't we tear our eyes away from horrors and tragic stories? This is the paradox of pleasure and pain, a phenomenon that seems illogical, yet is deeply human. In this video, we'll explore why what hurts sometimes attracts us. Is it just about brain chemistry? Or does pain have a deeper meaning? Emotional, social, cultural? We'll start with the basics. What is pain? And why do we sometimes want it? At its most basic level, pain is a biological warning system. It's a signal from the body to the brain. Warning, something is wrong. Without pain, we wouldn't know that something is threatening us. For example, that our hand is touching a hot stove, that our joints are overloaded, or that our body is sick. But that's not all. Pain teaches us to avoid dangerous situations in the future. A child who falls off a bike for the first time will be more careful next time they ride. It is thanks to pain that we create a map of threats in our brain. There are people who suffer from a very rare condition, congenital insensitivity to pain. They can get burned, break a bone, or have an infection and feel nothing. And while this may seem like a superpower, in reality, their life is a constant threat. They die young because their body doesn't warn them that something is wrong. Pain is not just suffering. It's information. It's a defense mechanism that evolution developed so that we can survive. But the paradox is that although it is inherently unpleasant, sometimes we seek it out. What if this same warning system can also provide a reward? It's time for endorphins, the natural drug in our head. Imagine a runner who has just completed a 10-kilometer run. They're sweaty, their muscles are burning, their breathing is heavy. But on their face appears a smile. Why? The answer lies deep within our brain, in a chemical reaction that accompanies pain: endorphins. Endorphins are neurotransmitters that act like natural opioids. Our body produces them in response to stress, pain, or intense physical exertion. Their role is to alleviate pain, calm us down, and restore balance. But interestingly, beyond relieving suffering, they can induce feelings of pleasure, euphoria, and even a mild high. It is precisely thanks to endorphins that the concept of runner's high emerged, the euphoria experienced by a runner. Although the body suffers, the brain is flooded with a wave of reward. Something that was supposed to be a warning signal turns into satisfaction. But it's not just running. Endorphins are also released during laughter, intense exercise, and even eating spicy foods that irritate pain receptors on the tongue. Pain activates the reward system. And that's why, paradoxically, it can be pleasant. Under the right conditions, suffering becomes a path to emotional or physical fulfillment. But it's not only biology that explains why pain can be desired. In many cultures, suffering is considered purifying and spiritual. Pain in many cultures around the world was not just suffering. It was sacred. The experience of pain was treated as a purification of body and soul, as a trial one had to go through to develop, atone for sins, or draw closer to something greater. In Christianity, suffering has a spiritual dimension. The story of Jesus, martyrs, or even ordinary people enduring pain in the name of God shows how deeply rooted the belief is that pain ennobles. In Buddhism and Hinduism, fasting and physical limitations are part of spiritual development. In some African and South American cultures, rites of passage involve the deliberate infliction of pain, skin cutting, flagellation, and even putting hands into sleeves full of ants. Why? To symbolically die as a child and be reborn as an adult. For many people, pain is more than a bodily reaction. It is proof of having passed a test, a symbol of purification, or even a form of drawing closer to one's inner self. In modern times, the echo of these beliefs still exists, for example, in the saying, "No pain, no gain," or the popular slogan. Pain is often perceived as something that purifies, atones for sins, or gives new life. It is not just a physical experience, but a deeply emotional and symbolic one. Bungee jumping, riding a motorcycle at 200 kilometers per hour, a tattoo needle repeatedly piercing the skin, cage fighting, free solo climbing. All these activities have something in common: pain, risk, and pleasure. But why? What makes some people love exposing their bodies and minds to extreme experiences? The answer lies in the brain, more precisely, in a substance called adrenaline. Adrenaline is a stress hormone. When we feel threatened, the body immediately mobilizes its forces. Heart rate speeds up, blood flow increases, senses sharpen. This is a state of readiness for fight or flight, how the primitive survival instinct works. But for some, this state is more than just a defensive reaction. It's a feeling of being truly alive. Physical pain and stress also release dopamine and endorphins, which provides an emotional kick, a kind of addictive reward. Some people, so-called sensation seekers, naturally have lower dopamine levels and a higher arousal threshold. Therefore, to feel something, they need stronger stimuli, such as extreme exertion, pain, or danger. Extreme pain and exertion trigger emotions that cannot be compared to anything else. It's a momentary escape from everyday life, a return to instinct, a powerful rush of brain chemistry. And for many people, that's precisely what's addictive. But sometimes, it's not about adrenaline or spirituality. Some people simply, physically, and literally enjoy pain. For most people, pain is something to be avoided. But there's a group of individuals for whom pain is a source of pleasure. Literally, this phenomenon is known as masochism, deriving satisfaction, arousal, or pleasure from experiencing pain, humiliation, or dominance. And while it sounds controversial, science not only understands it, but can even explain why it works. Pain and pleasure are processed in very close regions of the brain, mainly in the so-called reward centers, the nucleus accumbens, thalamus, and prefrontal cortex. When we experience pain, the brain releases natural soothing substances, endorphins, dopamine, and oxytocin, which can induce a state similar to euphoria. For some people, this process is so powerful that the pain itself ceases to be suffering and becomes a pleasant or emotionally satisfying stimulus. Masochism is not always sexual in nature, though it is often associated with it. It can also take an emotional form. For example, repeating painful relationships, exposing oneself to criticism, provoking situations that cause suffering because it provides some sense of control or fulfillment. It's not that a masochistic person enjoys suffering. It's just that their brain interprets this state differently. When someone hits me during a session, it's not about violence. It's intimacy, trust, and something more. Pain liberates me. Anonymous quote from a BDSM participant. Research shows that individuals who practice masochism often have higher levels of trust in their partners and a strong sense of self-identity, contrary to stereotypes. Masochism demonstrates that pain is not universally negative. Under the right conditions, psychological, emotional, cultural, it can become a source of deep satisfaction, fulfillment, and even love. But where do such differences between people come from? Why does one person associate suffering with trauma and another with pleasure? The answer may lie in how we were raised and what we were taught. Some of us have learned to avoid pain at all costs. Others, quite the opposite, have been told since childhood that pain must be endured or even sought out. Why? Because it hardens you, builds character, or makes you strong. Do you see the difference? How we perceive pain largely depends on our upbringing. A child who falls on the playground. On one hand, the mother runs to pick them up. On the other, the father says, "Don't cry, you're fine." Scenes from military, sports, schools, monasteries, where discipline is taught through patience and enduring pain. In many families, especially in traditional communities, a child is taught from a young age that pain is something that must be endured and even accepted as part of growing up. Don't complain. Men don't cry. It's for your own good. No pain, no gain. Such messages shape our psyche. They make us not only more resistant to suffering, but sometimes we even equate pain with value, strength, and progress. If pain was rewarded, for example, after a workout we receive praise, and after suffering, recognition, our brain begins to associate pain with success, development, and satisfaction. Over time, a mechanism may appear. If I'm not suffering, it means I'm not developing. Athletes who continue to train despite injuries, because that's what they were taught. Manual laborers who ignore pain, because you can't be a wimp. Students of strict schools where discipline was more important than comfort. If you hear from childhood that suffering has meaning, then as an adult you may treat it as something normal, necessary, and even good. pain is not always just a physical warning signal. Sometimes it's also a way to express emotions we can't put into words. Children cry because they can't yet speak. Adults sometimes scream through pain, though it's not always a literal scream. Some people experience such intense stress, trauma, fear, or loneliness that physical pain becomes their only way of communicating with themselves and others. Self-harm is often an attempt to translate internal suffering into something tangible, something that can be seen, felt, and understood. Pain allows for a sense of control over emotional chaos. It's an SOS signal directed both to oneself and to the environment. It can also bring temporary relief, as focusing on physical pain distracts from emotional pain. Pain can be a language through which we express the unsaid. In such cases, it's not about liking to suffer, but about an attempt to survive difficult emotions and situations. Finally, it's worth noting that pain also plays an adaptive role. It helps us learn, avoid dangers, and develop resilience. Pain is not only suffering and discomfort. It is also one of the most important mechanisms that help us survive and learn. From the dawn of time, our bodies have used pain as a warning system to protect us from danger. Pain acts like a red light on the dashboard. When something is wrong, it immediately informs us. Thanks to it, we learn to avoid dangerous situations, for example. Don't put your hand in the fire because you'll get burnt. Don't run on a slippery surface without caution because you might fall. But pain also teaches us how to take care of our bodies. It signals that something is damaged, needs rest, or treatment. On an emotional level, pain can also teach us what to avoid in relationships and life. For example, toxic people or situations that cause suffering. Pain is an adaptive tool that helps us survive, develop, and improve our quality of life. Although it is unpleasant, it is also essential. What is barely noticeable for one person can be unbearable for another. Why is this the case? The answer lies in individual biological, psychological, and environmental differences. Our genetics play a large role. Some genes regulate how our brain and nervous system process pain signals. This affects the pain threshold and its intensity. But that's not all. One's mental state also has immense significance. Stress, anxiety, and depression can lower our pain tolerance, while positive attitude and focus can raise it. Studies have shown that meditation and mindfulness training can change the way the brain reacts to pain, reducing perceived discomfort. Environment and upbringing also shape our pain experience. Past traumas or habits can influence how strongly we feel pain. Pain is not a single, constant experience. It's a very individual mix of body, mind, and life history. Understanding these differences allows us not only to cope better with pain, but also to appreciate that what is a challenge for one person can be immense suffering for another. Pain is a warning signal that protects our body. It's an emotion that can be a message about our deepest feelings. It's a tool that helps us grow, build character, and learn new things. And sometimes, for some, pain is a source of pleasure and fulfillment. So, can pain be positive? In a sense, yes. How we perceive it depends on our history, our mind, and our environment. It can strengthen us, teach us perseverance, and show us what is truly important to us. It can be a bridge to a better understanding of ourselves and others. I encourage you to consider, how do you relate to pain in your life? Can you see more in it than just suffering? Or perhaps right now, pain is a signal for you that is worth hearing? Pain is a universal part of the human experience, but its meaning and role can vary. Instead of running from pain, perhaps it's sometimes worth understanding it, accepting it, and using it as a source of strength and change. Because life is not just joy and comfort. It also involves challenges that shape us. And that is where the beauty of our human nature lies.